Let's continue our series looking at the historical reliability of the Old Testament of the Bible, now moving out of the conquest period into the Judges period. A fascinating inscription that archaeologists have found is the enormous Merneptah stele. This inscribed stone block listed groups that Pharaoh Merneptah had conquered around 1210 BC. Merneptah was the son of Ramses II. At this time, the Israelites had conquered much of Canaan and were living in the time of the Judges. This stone lists several nations with the hieroglyph for nation, and then it lists Israel with the glyph for people, because they did not yet have a king or capital city or anything. This perfectly fits what the Bible says about the time of Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel. There was also an Astrakhan inscription found near Lachish, written on a potsherd, which mentions the name Zerubbabel. This is about 150 years after Gideon, the famous judge who ruled Israel for 40 years, as mentioned in the Bible. And the Bible says that Gideon was named Zerubbabel because he destroyed Baal's altar. This shard from about 150 years later shows that the name was still in use for the next century, many miles south of Gideon's birthplace. There were also some large metal spearheads found at Kfar Manash in Israel, including one that was 26 inches long and weighed 4.5 pounds. There also happens to be a papyrus called Anastasia I from the late 13th century from Memphis, Egypt, that describes 7 to 9 foot tall giants living in the land of Canaan. And you can read the description here. This narrow valley is dangerous with Bedouin, hidden under the bushes. Some of them are 4 or 5 cubits from their noses to the heel, and fierce of face. Their hearts are not mild, did not listen to wheedling, and so on. So this matches pretty well with what the Bible describes about the very tall people like Goliath, whom David killed before he became king. Also from this time period, the town of Shiloh has been found, most likely, in recent excavations. This is where the Bible says the tabernacle was located for about 300 years during the time of the Judges. Archaeologists found Egyptian scarabs, which dated the layers to the right time period, and found a wall and foundation matching the dimensions of a tabernacle, the tabernacle. And they found the city gate, where the Bible records that the high priest Eli died. There's a burn layer from 1060 BC, from when the Philistines captured the ark and burned the city. And there's an animal bone pit next to the tabernacle site, which has the bones of sheep and oxen, clean animals, predominantly from the right side of the animals, matching the priest's portion. So overall, a pretty close match to what the Bible says about the town of Shiloh. Next, we will look at the monarchy, and especially the early monarchy, the United Monarchy. Here's another picture from the dig at Shiloh. So, moving toward the time of the monarchy. In Jerusalem, there's an area just south of Temple Mount called the City of David that has been excavated starting in the 19th century and more recently since 2005. There was a 60-foot retaining wall from the time of David called by archaeologists the stepped stone structure, which interlocked at the top with a very wide foundation walls of what is now labeled the large stone structure, and more than 200 stamped clay seals called bullae. A singular would be a bulla and plural is bullae, which are found in some of the dirt layers, including some Jehukal, son of Shelemiah, and Gedaliah, son of Pashur, who are mentioned by name in Jeremiah 38:1 as royal officials who opposed Jeremiah. So that would be 400 years after the time of David, but they're found right there in that royal complex area. They also found a Phoenician-type column header, fitting with how the Bible says Phoenician king Hiram sent workmen to help David build his palace. There is an inscription that was found called the Tel Dan inscription. This is an extremely important inscription. In 1993, archaeologists in Tel Dan in northern Israel found this old Aramaic inscription on a stone tablet where a king, probably Hazael from Damascus, was listing different nations he had conquered. He said that he killed 2 kings of the house of David. This tablet, or stele, was dated to about 140 years after the time of King David. And this Tel Dan stele was the first time that the name David had been found on an inscription from that time period. It also fits well with the biblical account that says King Jehoram was wounded in the fight against Hazael, although the Bible says that Jehu killed Jehoram and Ahaziah, rather than this tablet where Hazael takes credit for killing them. But the tablet has convinced many archaeologists that King David was a real king who lived at the time the Bible describes and started a dynasty of kings. Another interesting thing, the Pool of Gibeon, as described in 2 Samuel 2, has been found in the 1950s. This is from the time of David, where Abner's military group fought Joab's military group. And then Kirbat Kaiafa. This is an ancient fortress that has been excavated on the edge of David's kingdom next to the Philistines, overlooking the valley of Elah, where David fought Goliath. Several artifacts have been carbon dated and also dated from pottery, showing that the fort was in use only during the time of David and Saul. In fact, between 1020 BC and 980 BC, after which it was abandoned. So it's a more precise snapshot of that time period compared to Jerusalem or other cities, which were continuously inhabited for hundreds of years later, where new construction would displace the older layers. But in Caiapha, it's just more of a snapshot. They also found thousands of animal bones, including sheep, goats, cattle, but no pigs. They found 3 rooms with religious items, but no human or animal figurines. Archaeologist Joseph Garfinkel says, this suggests that the population of Khirbet Qeiyafa observed 2 biblical bans on pork and on graven images, and thus practiced a different cult than that of the Canaanites or the Philistines. End quote. There was even an ostracon found in 2008 with a 10th century ancient Hebrew text, which talks about providing care for the widows and orphans. So this fortress overall shows that David's kingdom must have been strong and well organized to be able to send scribes and messages to remote fortresses from Jerusalem. So next we'll move into the time period after King David, but there is quite a bit of evidence for that time of King David, King Saul, and King Solomon.